One night, one hero, a lifetime of legend. That's the kind of promise Julia Jackman's 2025 fantasy romance, 100 Nights of Hero, makes from the jump. With a cast led by Emma Corrin, Nicholas Galitzine, and Micah Monroe, this film stakes its claim in a genre blend that's all about atmosphere, emotional tension, and a dash of adventure. Jackman, who co-wrote the script with Isabel Greenberg, tackles a story set in a remote castle where relationships unravel and loyalties are tested. Why does this matter? Because in a world saturated with fantasy romances, 100 Nights of Hero aims to carve out a space where emotional complexity meets mythic storytelling, and Jackman's direction promises a visually rich, character-driven experience. Today, we're cutting into what makes this film tick, from its direction and performances to its thematic heart. The premise of 100 Nights of Hero is elegantly simple, yet loaded with potential. A charming houseguest arrives at a remote castle, disrupting the fragile balance between a neglectful husband, his innocent bride Cherry, and their devoted maid Hero. This setup immediately signals a film that's less about sweeping epic battles and more about intimate psychological drama wrapped in fantasy. Positioned within the fantasy romance adventure genre, it feels tailor-made for viewers who want emotional stakes as much as escapism. Released in 2025, the film lands in a cinematic landscape where streaming platforms have revitalized niche genre films, allowing stories like this to find their audience without the pressure of blockbuster tentpoles. It's not a sequel or part of a franchise, but it emerges amidst a resurgence of atmospheric, character-centric fantasy films that explore relationships through a fantastical lens. Julia Jackman's direction in 100 Nights of Hero can be expected to lean heavily into mood and visual storytelling. Jackman's prior work shows a knack for framing emotional intimacy through careful compositions and subtle camera movements, often using space to evoke character isolation or connection. Here, the remote castle setting likely becomes a character in itself, with the cinematography employing muted, earthy tones contrasted against sharp bursts of color during moments of emotional upheaval. The camera work probably favors lingering close-ups to capture the nuanced performances, while fluid tracking shots might underline the shifting power dynamics among the characters. Editing rhythm seems poised to balance quiet, contemplative scenes with tighter, tension-filled moments, building a slow burn rather than relying on overt spectacle. Drama and tension are crafted through the claustrophobic environment and the characters' fraught interactions, rather than action set pieces. Visually, expect a palette that reflects the story's emotional core, the cold stone of the castle, the soft textures of the bride's innocence, and the shadowy elements representing neglect and betrayal. Jackman's use of light and shadow likely underscores the film's themes of secrecy and revelation, with chiaroscuro effects highlighting moments of truth and deception. The editing probably avoids flashy cuts, instead opting for deliberate pacing to draw the audience into the simmering undercurrents of the narrative. This stylistic approach aligns well with the fantasy romance adventure genre's need to create an immersive atmosphere that supports both the magical and the emotional elements of the story. The performances in 100 Nights of Hero are anchored by Emma Corrin, whose range from vulnerability to quiet strength has been well established in previous roles. Corrin's portrayal of Hero, the devoted maid, is likely to be layered, balancing innocence with a growing resilience as the story unfolds. Nicholas Galitzine, as the charming houseguest, brings a magnetic presence that probably injects both allure and menace into the film's central conflict. Micah Monroe's role as Cherry, the innocent bride, offers a counterpoint of fragility and grace, which is essential for the film's emotional tension. The supporting cast, including veterans like Richard E. Grant and Felicity Jones, rounds out the ensemble with a mix of gravitas and depth. This cast combination suggests a strong chemistry and a capacity to handle the script's emotional intricacies, elevating what could have been a straightforward love triangle into a more compelling character study. Early reactions to the ensemble's interplay highlight a palpable tension that anchors the film's narrative momentum. Given the cast's background in both indie and genre cinema, audiences can expect performances that favor subtle emotional beats over grandiose declarations. The presence of Charlie XCX, known primarily as a musician, adds an intriguing layer to the ensemble, or casting hints at an infusion of contemporary energy or an unconventional approach to one of the supporting roles. Overall, the performances likely serve as the emotional engine of 100 Nights of Hero, making the fantastical elements feel grounded and relatable. Turning to writing and structure, the screenplay by Isabel Greenberg and Julia Jackman appears crafted to explore themes of loyalty, neglect, and the disruptive power of an outsider in a closed environment. The narrative structure probably unfolds over a relatively compressed timeline, suggested by the title's emphasis on 100 nights, allowing for a gradual buildup of tension and emotional stakes. The writing likely balances dialogue-driven character moments with rich visual storytelling, leaning into the fantasy elements to symbolize internal conflicts. Themes of identity and devotion might be explored through the relationship triangle at the story's core, with the castle setting amplifying feelings of confinement and longing. While the film is clearly a romance at heart, the adventure aspect may come less from external journeys and more from emotional and psychological risk-taking. The script's tone probably blends the poetic with the grounded, avoiding melodrama in favor of quieter, more resonant storytelling. Thematically, the film seems invested in examining how neglect and desire warp relationships, and how devotion, as embodied by Hero, can become both a source of strength and vulnerability. The fantasy elements likely serve as metaphors rather than overt magical mechanics, supporting the emotional narrative rather than overshadowing it. Structurally, expect a deliberate pacing that foregrounds character development over plot twists, making the story feel less like a conventional romance and more like a nuanced character study wrapped in mythic storytelling. While 100 Nights of Hero is not part of a franchise, it naturally invites comparison to other fantasy romance films that explore love entangled with power dynamics and mystical settings. Films like The Shape of Water or A Monster Calls come to mind, where the fantastical serves to deepen emotional truths rather than provide spectacle alone. Unlike blockbuster fantasy adventures that prioritize grand world building or action, this film aligns more with intimate, atmospheric stories that emphasize character over spectacle. Compared to recent romance fantasies, it seems to lean into a moody, gothic aesthetic that complements its themes of neglect and devotion. Audience expectations might center on a richly textured, emotional journey, rather than rapid-fire plot twists, placing it closer to art house fantasy romance than mainstream genre fare. In terms of audience, 100 Nights of Hero will likely appeal to viewers who appreciate layered performances, atmospheric settings, and stories that dwell on emotional complexity. Fans of Julia Jackman's previous work or Isabel Greenberg's writing will find familiar strengths in the film's careful pacing and thematic depth. However, those seeking fast-paced fantasy adventures or high-concept romance with clear-cut resolutions might find the film's subtlety and introspective focus less immediately satisfying. The film's strength lies in its mood and character interplay, but that same approach could feel slow or overly restrained to viewers expecting more conventional genre beats. As a standalone piece, it stakes a claim as a thoughtful, visually arresting exploration of love and loyalty under pressure. Who exactly should watch 100 Nights of Hero? If you enjoy fantasy that feels intimate rather than expansive, romance that explores flawed characters instead of fairy tale archetypes, and performances that carry emotional weight, this film is worth your time. Its strengths lie in direction that respects subtlety, a cast capable of conveying complex feelings without excess, and writing that weaves metaphor into the fabric of its story. On the flip side, if you lean toward fast-moving plots, clear moral lines, or blockbuster spectacle, this film might test your patience. The deliberate pacing and focus on character over action make it a more niche experience. Ultimately, it's a film for those willing to immerse themselves in a carefully crafted mood piece that rewards attention to detail and emotional nuance. To sum up, 100 Nights of Hero stands out as a quietly ambitious fantasy romance adventure. Julia Jackman's direction and the strong ensemble elevate a premise centered on emotional upheaval and loyalty, tested by an outsider's arrival. The film's visual style and measured pacing create an immersive atmosphere that supports its themes without overwhelming them. While it might not satisfy every fantasy fan craving spectacle or rapid plot twists, it fills an important space for those seeking emotional depth in genre storytelling. It's a film that asks you to lean in, to feel the cracks beneath the surface, and to consider how devotion can be both a shield and a vulnerability. So one night, one hero, and a lifetime of legend, 100 Nights of Hero invites us into a castle where love and loyalty are complicated, fragile, and fiercely human. If you appreciate fantasy that walks the line between myth and reality, this is a journey worth taking. Thanks for joining me here on Cut to Reel. If you want more deep dives into films that blend craft with heart, you know where to find us. Until next time, keep watching and keep thinking. Thanks for watching Cut to Reel. I'll see you next time for another look beneath the surface of cinema's best.